Hey everyone, this is Roman Prokopchuk, and this is the Digital Savage Experience podcast. Today I have with me Todd Palmer. Todd is an executive coach, keynote speaker, thought leader, author, and CEO who is committed to helping business owners tackle their obstacles and clear their path to success. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here.
My pleasure. So tell me a little bit about your journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Oh my gosh. So this could take up this one question could take up your entire show. So I'm a retired CEO. I retired a few years ago, and I started my company when I was about 27 years old. That was my first official launch as an entrepreneur. When I reflect back upon my life's journey, I probably really started being an entrepreneur when I was about 12 years old in school. Selling candy. I grew up in a very small town. I had like 42 kids in my graduating class. And, we had one store in town. So I'd stop at that store, buy a bunch of candy with my allowance, and go to school and buy it for a nickel and sell it for a quarter. Margins were phenomenal. So that's kind of my first foray into being an entrepreneur. Fast forward, I'm 27 years old. I just became a single dad, raising my son by myself. And I decided that was the best time to start my company. I started a staffing business, a temporary help company here in Metro Detroit. And I really got into entrepreneurship because I found that I really wasn't a very good employee. I had too many ideas. I didn't follow the rules. I don't know, may resonate with some of your listeners who are going through that same process. And about 10 years into my journey, we had some good years and some bad years. We had been really fortunate, like day 72 of being in business, we actually started making money, which is really rare because we were in a space where there was an increased demand and a diminished supply of human capital across our area. Put together a transportation company, started driving people literally to work before there was Uber. And but I also made a lot of bad choices, or a lot of negative choices in regards to the people I hired to work for me, how I didn't manage them, how I avoided conflict, how I listened to my imposter syndrome, the itty bitty shitty committee in my head who was telling me how much I suck and how I could have done things differently. So by 2006, I'd gotten myself into quite a precarious position. The company, me personally as well, we were $600,000 in debt on about a $2.5 million run rate. The company is completely upside down and underwater. And the bank was going to take my house. I was about 2 months away from running out of all of my money. My son, who was by about that time, about 10, 11 years old, was freaking out, wondering, where are we going to live? My dad's completely, as tweens will do, my dad's completely screwed up my life. And I, for the first time in my career, decided it was no longer feasible to be that rugged individualist entrepreneur. I wasn't the oracle. I realized I didn't have all the answers to all the problems all the time. And I finally raised my hand and I hired a coach. And that coach came in, taught me some quick financial literacy. But he also said we had to make some sweeping changes. And part of that sweeping change was I decided, with his help, to retool the company, relaunch the company, but not file bankruptcy because I didn't think that was the right thing to do. But I did decide to replace my team. I fired my entire company in one day on September 9th, 2006, literally the worst day of my business career. And I started over. Over the course of the next 8 years, we made many pivots, reinvented the business, and paid off all the debt, thankfully. I'm very proud to say that. And we made the Inc. 5000 as one of the fastest growing companies in America, an amazing 6 times. To make it once was pretty cool. To make it 6 times, never thought that would happen. About 3 years ago, I retired from that business, and I've been coaching and speaking ever since on entrepreneurship, on getting stuck, inside out leadership, that in order to change your business, first we must change ourselves. In order to change your family, we must change ourselves. In order to change your marriage, we must change ourselves. And my next book will be coming out in February of 2021, called From Suck to Success, a guide to extraordinary entrepreneurship. And we talk a lot about getting people unstuck around times like COVID, around things such that you can't control, as well as the choices you can control. So in a nutshell, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I often say you're kind of your worst, nightmare. It's a you versus you battle. So the first thing you need to get through in terms of a hurdle for a business decision, like you said, a personal decision, making any kind of change or changing a habit, is getting out of your own head and stepping out of that kind of comfort zone as well. So I think that's important. Obviously, a lot of businesses don't necessarily pivot in terms of restaffing the whole business, and obviously it's a scary time, but I think now more than ever, that kind of message is needed with the, the state of the global economy and different things in terms of specific industries just riddled in terms of shutdown. So I think that message is really important.
Well, I agree with you. It's interesting. What my coach had me do is he said, we got to change the doom loop in your head around how you look at the world and how you're seeing things. And now I look back now, I'm pretty convinced that I was clinically depressed. I couldn't get out of bed. I wouldn't go into the office. I was avoiding things. So the first book he had me read was a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins, one of the best, probably my favorite business book of all times. And in there's a section about Admiral James Stockdale, and it ties into his concept called the Stockdale paradox. And I think Stockdale paradox back in 2006, then we went through the recession, and even as we go through the COVID times, really applies. And for people who haven't heard about it, the Stockdale paradox at its simplest form is confront your brutal reality. Stockdale's brutal reality was he was a prisoner of war. He was being held against his will for 8 years. And during that 8 years, he estimated he was tortured upwards of 30 times. The underlying part of that was to remember that I will survive this. I will get through this. And what he chose to do from a mental, in a mindset perspective, is I've decided I'm going to make these 8 years the defining moment of my life. Well, COVID's no different. We can take a look at our businesses, whether we're in restaurant, retail, hospitality, service-based businesses. I had to do this with my speaking business. I lost all of my stages within 2 weeks, and I had to pivot my model and how to still serve my audience. And the real underlying factor, and that I really lean out so much upon on the Stockdale paradox is I decided, and I think a lot of people now can decide, that COVID isn't happening to me, it's happening for me. How can I get more creative? Where can I, if I'm very much like I was, I had to be in the room. I had to be on stage. I had to be on planes. I had to be in airports. I had to be around the globe. Well, now I can be from my living room. I can be from my home. I can still deliver the message. I can still reach out to entrepreneurs who are up in chaos and crisis during these tough times and during the other times to be of service to them. So if I doubled down on what I'm really there for, it made it a whole lot easier. And I learned that back in 2006 when I helped turn the company around, relying on my coach and great books like Good to Great.
Yeah, I think that's really important in that kind of owning your truth, and regardless if it's bad or good, because we're not necessarily all dealt the same cards in terms of situations and success. So making the best out of the variable. I mean, when an industry closes, you have no choice. So either, fold with it or pivot. I know obviously a lot of people have pivoted into different things that may have been a passion that they never had time to do in terms of being laid off, furloughed, their business is closing. And I mean, it's all perspective. And like
Oh,
you
for
said,
sure.
in terms of like the mindset as well, what you went through in terms of like the chaos and the uncertainty of your business, I say that entrepreneurship is one of like the loneliest journeys. So you have all of that on your shoulders, and mental health is often underlooked. So a lot of founders,
Oh, yeah.
executives, things of that nature, there's a higher rate of depression, suicide, and that's really underlooked in this community.
Oh, I think it's even bigger. Yes, and it's kind of a yes and statement. So yes, depression is higher. You have an 80% chance of your business failing in the United States if you start up. I mean, divorces only happen 50% of the time across all sections here in the US, but you pivot that divorce rate into entrepreneurship, it's significantly higher. Suicide rate significantly higher. Drug and alcohol addiction significantly higher. I've read some really interesting studies to your point around, you know, the behaviors of an entrepreneur and the behaviors of an addict or an alcoholic are almost identical. It's how they're funneled. It's how they're driven through the marketplace, meaning, if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm chasing the next, quote unquote, the next high, I mean, I got to get my next sale. That was me. I had to get to 20 million. I was driving. I didn't realize that only 4.3% of all companies in the US ever reached $1 million. So I'm running 3 million, 4 million. I'm telling myself how much I suck. So my message was completely jacked up. But then you take a look, then you take that and you lay that over someone who's always chasing the next high through drugs and alcohol, or so through other addictions. The behaviors of an entrepreneur are so much like that of someone who's got an addiction problem, because I'm addicted to, and then what do we do with that addiction? So I'm chasing my next sale. I got to get it. I'll give it away just to get the yes. I'm addicted to the yes. And then we peel it down to the next layer. Who pays the price for that yes? Well, I take it out on my family. I take it out on my staff. I get into debt. Well, someone who's got addiction problems, they typically will take it out on their family. But what I honestly think Roman, at the bottom line of that is both entrepreneurs and people with addiction problems are trying to fill an emptiness within with external validation, either through entrepreneurship or the fun and excitement of whatever the drug of choice might be. And we all have an emptiness. And as soon as we recognize and realize that the external world isn't going to make us whole, the external world isn't going to fill us up, the money, the success, whatever, the awards, once we realize that and we pivot our definition of success into something differently, then, only then do we really get the satisfying life we want. I had to, I was, like I said, I was wrapped up in I had to get a 20 million in revenue. Fast forward to about 8-9 years ago, I realized that that's not a good goal. That's not a successful, I didn't feel good because we had the Inc. 5000 6 times. My friends were like, oh my gosh, you're this rock star entrepreneur. I'm like, it doesn't feel so good. It doesn't fill that emptiness. Here's what I found out really does work. And I got this from Tony Robbins, so I have to give credit where credit is due. Success is doing what I want, when I want, with whom I want to do it, as often as I want to do it. It's that choice. It's the people. It's the experiences. I can have a great experience at an amazing VIP event, or I can go to work for a walk in the park with my family and still have a satisfying, successful experience.
Yeah, I agree. And the parallels are kind of uncanny. My wife and I are foster parents in terms of my personal
Oh,
life. In the last 2 years, we fostered 22 kids, and
oh my
obviously
gosh, that's
addiction.
tremendous. The world is lucky to have people like you.
Thank you. So it's an interesting like parallel that you've mentioned in terms of addiction, and I see a lot of obviously parents and guardians have lost their children because of addiction, and it's one of those things where like I do see the parallels in terms of like being so focused or so hungry or so driven for that, high. I mean, it is kind of a dopamine,
Oh,
release. So it
absolutely.
really mirrors it and other things that are addictive through the advancements of technology. So social media, there's a real like now addiction to social media. So whatever kind of your vice is, it's how you channel it. So you can channel that negativity and let it drive you to something positive, or obviously it's easier said than done than getting out of an addiction as well.
Oh, for sure. And it's interesting. So, when people approach me about me coaching them, often the question is, why should I hire you? I love the question. And one of the things I tell them is I still use a coach. So I don't have all the answers. And I use a coach. His name is Dr. Daniel Friedland. He's out of San Diego, California. And he's literally helped me change my life. And, I didn't hire him until I was already, in the eyes of society successful, but I had that emptiness within, that longing within. And we spent so many hours pivoting me out of that mindset around expectation and moving it into intentions. Expectations are win or lose. Expectations or intentions have so many tributaries off that river to where we can go. And then you go a layer deeper about that fix of dopamine. And I remember I had this argument with him one time. It was funny. There was one of those one-sided arguments. Sometimes we have with our spouses where only one of us is talking, yet there's an argument going on. And I said to him, I said, as a kid, the programming I received is go to school, get married, start a family, and just be happy. My family, that was like the way we did things. I said, I did all that and I'm not happy. What the hell's going on? And he was really honest about it, going back to the dopamine spike. He's like, that's not how it works. And he's a neuroscientist by training. He's literally done brains. I mean, he knows more about this stuff than anybody I'd ever met. He goes like, being happy is a spike of dopamine. You want to be happy? Go have some chocolate. You want to have a satisfying life? Realize there's going to be highs and lows. Focus on the journey. It's the hero's journey. Go to literature, go to films, go wherever. Once I pivoted into that mindset, it was game changing for me because I then realized what I was chasing, like the high, like the dopamine spike, whatever we get, was not sustainable. And it wasn't going to give me what I want.
Yeah, I agree. So, what's one thing that currently kind of motivates you to succeed? Obviously, those motivations may have changed over time, but what currently motivates you to succeed?
Well, that's a great question. So when I think of motivation, again, it was a question I had for Danny years ago. I said, I just don't feel motivated today. He's like, that's okay, because motivation only happens after you take action, which I had no idea about. So I find, first of all, if I feel unmotivated, and it still happens, first thing I do is I take an action. And I take that action towards one thing. I take it towards my why, my WHY. 12 years ago, I was blessed to meet a guy named Simon Sinek before he had written his first book, had done his famous TED Talk. And I meet him and I engaged him for 2 years to figure out 2 words: improve lives. That's my why. So every action I take is to improve someone's life. I do that through expressions of gratitude. I do that through spending time with people that are important to me. I do it with my clients, and with my clients, people get so wrapped up of, I want to grow my business. I want this. I want that. Why do you coach people? I coach people. My dopamine spike is the aha moment, the light bulb moment when there's a concept and they're struggling and they're trying and they're driving towards what they really want to achieve in life. When I see that happen, that's my reward. That's, I don't work for free, but that's my payment in many respects. That's what gets me motivated. It's like, okay, when can I have that next aha moment? And what I found is amazing is, I've been volunteering a lot during COVID to work with, kids in schools, and having some kid who looks totally checked out in the beginning of the call, have that aha moment. Oh my gosh, that's a great day for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think finding your why is obviously becomes what your core value and foundation is. And obviously, if you're an entrepreneur, that resonates into your business. So your business is an extension of you. You position it in terms of your core values. Obviously, you can add some other things onto it, but it's a reflection of you. So you truly have to understand what your why is in order to have direction in that sense. Because if you don't have a foundation or a core value in that sense as a business, you're going to go in different directions, and then you're going to have things that contradict that you will pivot in directions that possibly lead you in the wrong direction and don't necessarily align with who you are or what your why is, because you haven't defined that yet.
Oh, couldn't agree with you more. And so many people think that I'm just going to watch the cynic video on YouTube and boom, it's going to hit me. It took me 2 years to figure it out. And when talking with Simon, he says, this is an iterative process. It may shift for you over the course of time, but don't put the pressure on yourself to get it right the first time or the second time. I went through a whole bunch of gyrations and iterations. We changed the core values of the company multiple times as people came and go, and as we really got through those dark days. And to arrive on improve lives is so simple. And people think, oh, well, you must have just woke up and there it was. Like, no, it took a while. So people listening, you recognize and realize it's a satisfying journey. It's a journey worth taking. Find your core values, find your why, but recognize it's going to take some time for most of us.
Yeah, I agree. And you made a good point before about first taking action and then getting motivated. Because if, like you said, you watch a video, you go on YouTube, motivational speaker, Tony Robbins, whoever you look at, Gary Vaynerchuk, whoever like pumps you up, you're pumped up for like an hour or two, and then it starts dying down unless you
Yes.
do something about it and take action.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's the simplest thing. So during the COVID times, I went through my phone. I have too many contacts to count, and I just reached out to people I hadn't talked to in sometimes weeks or months or even sometimes years. I'll own that. I'm sometimes not the world's best friend when it comes to staying connected. But what I felt the world needed, and I think it still needs, is when we have to socially distance, we create in the theory of a lot of disconnection. And so if we can bring people together, there's so many different ways to do that. So I thought, I'm going to own my process. And I just started reaching out and connecting with people. Well, from that, I've rekindled some relationships that should have done a better job with. So now I've got a second chance. I love that. But I also was able to really reach into my old relationships, or maybe some relationships that I didn't know people needed something from me, or I could be of service to them. And I had a servant leadership mindset. And I've helped entrepreneurs. I tracked it for about 3 months, and over about a 60 to 70-day period, I talked to over 42 entrepreneurs who were in pain, who were in chaos, who were in crisis. And a lot of them weren't the people I reached out to. They were like, hey, I reached out to Roman. Roman referred me to his friend Sue or his buddy Bill, and he talked to Todd. He can help you with this stuff. And I met so many cool new people, so many amazing entrepreneurs who just were wrapped up like I was in 2006 with the itty bitty shitty committee telling me how much I sucked. I kid you not. I had people say, I can't believe I didn't see COVID coming. I'm like, okay, well, unless you're Nostradamus, I don't know how you would have seen COVID coming. So let's give ourselves a break. And I have this model I put them through to get them unstuck. And I've had one person was literally going to file bankruptcy. 35 minutes later, she had found $4 million in unpaid invoices and other ways she had money squirreled away, and she's still in business today. That is so rewarding, but it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't done that positive intention, if I hadn't made that first step in the morning to reach out to people.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's important, like more so now with people being more distant away from each other. So I think that's important, kind of touching base. offering help. And it's not necessarily help, it's just, how are you, what's on your mind, and just listening. I mean, I find just listening in terms of a skill is more important than actually giving advice sometimes, and is obviously more therapeutic for people that are going through really stressful situations.
Oh, I love your insight around that. I practice a process called listen to absorb, not to respond. And when I listen to absorb, what I do for people is I let them have two things. I let them be seen and I let them be heard. When you look at entrepreneurs, when you look at little kids, I even was really, this is going to sound a little odd, but I was really blessed to spend 3 days in a maximum security prison volunteering around the topic of entrepreneurship. And what I found was that what I thought I'd go in and I would be really of service to these people who are incarcerated. They were a service to me, believe it or not. They taught me so much about how they see the world and how had someone maybe when they were younger seen them and heard them and validated their humanness, their otherness, their existence. And now I've transferred that to the entrepreneurs I work with. It's amazing as we think about, you think about an entrepreneur, a guy's running a $50 million company and a person who happens to be incarcerated. Peel all the labels away, peel all the different, they're so much more similar than they are different. And again, it goes back to what you said so eloquently. They want it, they want to be heard. And it's our job as coaches and as our job as people who are of service to others, listen to absorb. Listen, active listening is such an underdeveloped and underappreciated skill.
Yeah, I agree. So, what's one thing that you may have seen as a weakness in yourself in the past that you've turned around and utilized as a strength today?
Oh, wow. Again, this could be another hour conversation. So, it's interesting when I think of so the story I used to tell myself was my weaknesses were my Achilles heel. Then I saw this speaker. His name is David Rendell. We've become friends. He has a book called Freak Factor. And his whole mantra, his whole messaging is what's weird makes you wonderful. Play to your strengths, not your weaknesses. Well, I grew up in a generation where you get your report card, for example, and you get 5 A's and 1 C. My parents would only want to talk about the C. They don't want to talk about the thing I didn't do well. When I saw Rendell speak, and by the way, he's Dr. David Rendell. He's a PhD. Everybody thinks he's just this really nice, friendly guy. He's really well researched and really, really well positioned to be the expert that I see him as. And as I was explaining to my stepdaughter Etta the other day, she's 11 years old, and she's still not quite sure what I do for a living. And I said, all the things I get criticized for as a kid. So I wouldn't sit still. I defied authority. I would get kicked out of class. I got great grades. So I wasn't a troublemaker, but I would just question things. Now, what do I get? And I had a really good tight group of friends who I always was their go-to person when they were in pain, chaos, and crisis. Now, what do I get paid to do for a living? I listen to people. I question things and approach with massive curiosity. I'm of service to other people, and I help other people get unstuck and help them solve their problems. So the things I was criticized for, because there's no way to make money doing that when you're 17, 18 years old, 16, 15 years old. Now, 50 years old, that's what I get paid to do. So what I ultimately, to answer your question, the things that were my weaknesses have all, with my reframing of them, become my strengths. And I realized that society told me they weren't going to serve me well. And actually society was wrong. They really do serve me well.
Yeah, I agree. It's like obviously flipping the script or switch or whatever analogy you want to use. And there's a lot of things that didn't benefit you or in the traditional kind of education system or societal norms, because I mean you're pushed to a 9 to 5, and still somewhat staying at a job X amount of years and then retiring is kind of the goal, and getting as far as possible in kind of a corporate ladder. And when you start, kind of going against that in a way, people start noticing and saying things and discouraging you. But taking those skills, I mean, I've had a lot of people on the show with similar experiences with diagnosis of oppositional defiance disorder and ADD, ADHD, different autism, and all those were kind of put as labels, even though they may have done well in school and other things. But refining that and then obviously using it to your advantage is key today, and whatever else that we go through in 2021 and going on.
As I was thinking about your question, I thought there's a reverse of this too. So when I was 5 years old, I typically tell the story, but it just seems like it fits. So I'm 5 years old, And within 90 days, my entire life changed. Within 90 days, my father passes away out of nowhere at 45 years old with a heart attack. My mom had been the stay-at-home mom, went into the workforce. She had never had to do that before. My older brother got an athletic scholarship and went 3 states away. My older sister got married and moved across the United States from the Midwest to the West Coast. We knew she was moving. So within 90 days, my entire nuclear family, as the mind of a 5-year-old, had abandoned me. So what did that tell me? The only person I can rely upon is me. Starting a company as a startup entrepreneur, that's a great trait to have. I can do sales, I can do ops, I can do HR, I can do accounting, I can, I use the analogy of a restaurant. I can greet you at the table, I can serve you the food, and I can wash the dishes and lock up at night. I can cover everything. Look at me, I'm a hero until it doesn't work. When I'm trying to grow and scale a company and I'm hiring people and I think I'm smarter than them and I have all the answers, then all of a sudden I go into this big spiral of depression because what worked for me didn't. So it can also, as we go through life and learn these awarenesses about self, there's I think such an important thing to be a lifelong learner if you're going to be an entrepreneur. And a lifelong learner realizes what worked for me before doesn't necessarily work for me now as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I often say complacency is the death of innovation. So, markets change, technology changes, different things in terms of where you can pivot or take your business or learning. So it's one of those things where there's a lot of people. And if you look at the Fortune 500 list, 10, 20, 30 years ago, majority of those companies aren't on that list anymore because they got to a point, we have market share, we know everything, no one's going to beat
Hmm.
us, but that's not necessarily how it works. So.
Yeah, well, and you get the disruptors who come in. I mean, look at standard industries like the cab companies in the United States. They had a monopoly. Boom, out of nowhere comes Uber and Lyft. Just these small. Blockbuster was around forever. Then we have Netflix, we have streaming, all these different things, and people didn't pivot in ways that would have really served them better. I just saw this thing the other day where I think it was either Sears or Kmart. It was Sears had the idea of home delivery, just like Amazon does. But instead, they went with this traditional brick and mortar and they bought Kmart. Had they just pivoted into being Amazon, they'd still be in business today versus the dinosaur and, in the annals of business history, basically no longer relevant. So we all go through these things, both business-wise and I think also personally.
Yeah, I agree. So, what's one piece of advice you can leave with the audience, personal or professional?
Oh, it's really simple. Whatever you think the external problem in the world is, chances are it's you. I thought my staff was terrible. I thought the marketplace stunk. The reality is the bottleneck in my business was me. I'm successfully divorced. Take that for what it's worth. It's amazing how, as I reflect upon that decision and that relationship, how a lot of it was me. It's inside out leadership. It's never what we think it is if we're so focused on blaming others and not accepting responsibility. The great thing about it is once we become empowered, at least for me, once I become empowered, turn the businesses around. I'm in a great relationship now. I've got a great relationship with the key people in my life because I own my part of that.
Yeah, I agree. And you're only looking at a situation from like what you see. If you're getting multiple people that are coming back with the same feedback and you're being defensive about it, because obviously at the end of the day, if you reach some level of success, you do have an ego component that may or may not come out every once in a while. So sometimes you refuse to come to terms with information like that, but being humble and kind of taking a step back. And I believe having emotional empathy and the biggest soft skill that I look for is emotional IQ. So
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
understanding that, taking a step back and positioning it like feedback, regardless of how it's packaged and delivered, it's still feedback. So don't get defensive about it or standoffish. See if it's applicable and at least try to make some kind of change. In worst case, you can go back to that behavior if you don't think it worked. And best change or best case scenario, it's actually something beneficial for you.
It's interesting that you say that there's this example I do when I'm on stage, and it's I take a piece of paper and I write the number 9 on it, and then I hold it. I have someone come up and I share it with them. So in the process of sharing it with them, the paper flips. I'm seeing a 9. They're seeing a 6, and I ask them, "What do you see?" Well, I see a 6. I see a 9. I say, "So who do you think's right?" 9 out of 10 times they go, we're wrong. No, actually, we're both right. And if we can make space in our mindset that we don't someone doesn't have to win or lose. Someone can be right. It's all our perspective on it. It's amazing how much more kind we are to each other. And it's amazing how much more kinder we are to ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. Even though I pivoted in the 2008 recession to digital marketing from criminal justice and an internship with the Secret Service, one class I remember in terms of college is Intro to Logic, and it's like it makes you think things out of the scope. So we had a problem that 1+1 at one point in history or time will equal 3, and there's like a 5-page mathematical equation where it equals 3. And now, like, you ask 99.9% of people, they say it's always 2. But technically, like in time, in space, and everything else, it can possibly equal 3. Like your example is clear cut where you flip it and it can be 50-50. But there's examples out there that is just like logic and perspective, and it can happen at some point of time.
I'm going to look that up. So I'm glad we met because I'm going to check that out. Because if you had asked me that, you would have pop quizzed me. I said, oh, it's always 2. And it's funny because my son's a CPA. I'm going to play that game with him tonight when I talk to him on the phone. It's like, hey, is it always 1+1 always 2? So yeah, it's so much. There's a lot of people will, I call it die on the hill. They'll fight to the death to be right. I often ask them though, how satisfied are you? How are you happy are you happy that you beat down your opponent, whether it's in a business deal, or sometimes, I'm going to be right with my family, with my wife, with my husband, with my kids, versus approaching it with curiosity, asking somebody why they see it the way they see it, giving them that opportunity, that breathing space to be seen and to be heard, so that you can instead of disconnecting, you can connect with the other party and give up the pride and ego around being right. I think there's such a valuable lesson in what you're sharing about the study on that 1+1 equals 3. I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, it was just like I don't know. That class was just a little much with situations like that, and different things where it was like different variables that weren't even mathematical. So we had to define or redefine what like our thought process was in terms of like math and equations and stuff. So it's like one of those things where even though it was an introductory course and I took it as an elective, it really like added some perspective in terms of different scenarios as well.
I love that. I love that. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I really appreciate stepping by today. Can you let the audience know how they can find you and when the book comes out, where it can be available?
Sure. So it's easy to find me. I'm on social media. But if anybody who's heard me today, I would love to have a conversation with you, because when I talk with entrepreneurs or people who are struggling with chaos and crisis, it allows me to pay homage to the people who've been of service to me, like my coach, Danny Friedland, my previous coaches. I've had coaches in my life, gosh, coming up on 20 years now. So anybody who's heard me on the show, feel free to reach out to me at todd@extraordinaryadvisors.com. Reach out, 30 minutes for free, no charge, just talk you through what you're going on. Maybe I'll help you find $3 or $4 million that you didn't find, like the person in Toronto I spoke with. I'm on social media. You can catch me on LinkedIn. You can catch me on Facebook. You can catch me on Instagram. I'm all on there. The book will be out in February of 2021. It'll be on Amazon. It'll be on Barnes and Noble. And then ultimately the goal is, once the hardcover comes out, once the Kindle version comes out, hopefully we'll have an auditory book by the end of the year, if there's enough demand.
Awesome. Thanks again for stopping by.
Thank you.